Tonight, I'm thrilled to be sitting next to John Slump. I met John, gosh, it's been a long time ago. John, you graduated in '08, right?
Thanks.
So I think I met John in the 2006, 2007 time frame. And when I first met him, I thought, man, this is a very serious person that was incredibly driven, very, very smart, learned how to write a business plan, and he and his partner, Jerry Garfield, wrote one of the most detailed, advanced business plans I think I've ever seen, and he probably did dozens and dozens of iterations. And when he first came to, and I first met him, he told me about wanting to do this medical device, and I'm sitting there looking at a undergraduate business student in Tempe thinking to myself, this has got a real uphill climb to try to bring a device forward in 2006, 2007, that time frame, let alone undergraduate students in the College of Business. But getting to know John, I started seeing his tenacity and everything that what drives him, and I thought, you know what, these guys might just pull it off. So tonight we're going to talk to John about how he did it. He's also had a pretty unique career with that company and getting involved in some other medical device companies. So I think it's a great story, and our plan with this is I'm going to ask John some questions, and we'll have kind of a conversation, and then at some point we'll open it up for questions. So please listen in and be ready to ask John some questions, and I think it'll be a really inspiring and educational experience. I first want to thank Jan Finlayson for helping get all of this set up, so let's give it up for Jan. She makes sure there's alcohol over there. I think that's what she does.
Yes.
And the rest of the Iowa JPEC team to put this together. But again, this is about hearing John's story, so we always like to start with a giant University of Iowa Hawkeye welcome. So please welcome back to our campus, Mr. John Slump. All right, John, we always like to have you start. Tell a little bit about yourself, where you're from. Did you have any entrepreneurial experiences as a kid? Why you chose to come to the University of Iowa? All the way up until the creation of Corvita. So tell everybody a little bit about your background.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay? Rockin'. Okay, I'm from Sioux City, Iowa. Actually, I met a fellow student here who went to school at Sergeant Wolf Luton High School, which is where I went to school, believe it or not. I actually just lived right down the road from my grandma, so that's kind of funny. But I think when you say, I'm the son of an entrepreneur. He's a small business owner, kind of a lifestyle business, 8 to 10 employees sort of business. So I think, I've had an upbringing with a predisposition towards entrepreneurship and a lot of flexibility of schedule and kind of a reasonably nice upbringing. I think, so when you say what was the first entrepreneurial thing you did, I was thinking of a summer where, maybe at 12 I started to mow some neighbors' lawns, and I kind of pulled this up a little more, 13, 14, and by the time I was 16, I was completely, unbeknownst to my father, stealing his truck and all of his equipment from his second little storage garage, and I was going around all over town. Someone called him up one day and said, hey, I think I just saw your kid rolling around in your nice red truck with like some equipment in the back. What's going on? So he had a nice little lawn care business going there, which is kind of fun. So, I mean, so when I knew I was going to come to Iowa, and I think got some nice scholarships to come, and I knew I wanted to do business, and I knew I'm kind of a numbers nerd at heart for sure, through and through, and so finance seemed to make a lot of sense to me. Also learned a lot about accounting, the language, almost the language of business, if you will. And when I was an undergrad, freshman, kind of sophomore year, my sister was diagnosed with melanoma, or skin cancer, and I learned that the healthcare workers treating patients like my sister with chemotherapy medications were being exposed to the chemotherapy drugs. They were becoming infertile, having miscarriages, birth defects, genetic mutations. Even leukemia, and so it never really made sense to me that healthcare workers trying to help patients like my sister were getting put in the same shoes or having all these other problems, and that was sort of the problem or pain point that spawned Corvita and my first true entrepreneurial endeavor in the medical device arena.
So let's take a step back. So your sister gets skin cancer. What prompted you to I mean, how did you find out about the actual problem? I mean, were you talking to the healthcare providers? I mean, you clearly had some type of interest in learning as much as you could, but to go from she had it and then you recognized this problem, what was it that got you to start asking the questions about how chemotherapy drugs were delivered and to actually find the problem, which is the leaking of the devices, current devices on the market?
Yeah, so I remember visiting my sister, and she has, at the time I had a couple of young children and had a doctor's appointment. So she asked me to come with her to the and help with the kids at the doc's office. And what I saw at least was that it seemed like, the healthcare workers, they had kind of be gowned up, garbed up, and we were just as apprehensive about the chemotherapy as maybe the patients. And I kind of started asking questions and like, I don't, really, and being a young sort of, and they just kind of told me, yeah, no, we don't. I mean, this stuff is toxic. The patients know it and the workers know it too. And so it struck me that maybe there was something there, like maybe there's a way to help make chemotherapy prep and delivery a little safer for workers and patients and visitors like me and the kids who are in the hospital.
So, kind of a quick lesson to everyone there, looking for the problem and being somebody that had that kind of that entrepreneurial mindset, that you noticed something and you started asking some questions. Mm-hmm. And then I know John and his partner did some research, and then that's really when, because I remember when I first met you guys, you started telling me about this. I'm like, that can't be possible. And you're like, yeah. And they provided all of this research to really define the problem. Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing that really always impressed me about you guys was you had the why. There was a compelling reason why you were focused on doing this, because your sister had been exposed to this. Now, that said, you're an undergraduate business student, then you meet Jared, and you think, what was it that internally told you, yes, somebody that has no medical training, no medical device experience, no nothing, I'm just a kid from Sioux City that's trying to get a finance degree. What sparked in you that I think I can create the world's first leak-proof chemotherapy drug transfer device?
Well, first, in full disclosure, there was a first mover product already out on the market. So there was some. I would say, find a pain point that customers recognize as painful enough to pay for a solution, and then there was a first mover, a product that was having some success, but it had some problems and chinks in the armor. So it was good validation. Competition's good validation of a good idea. And we thought, well, maybe that, so we don't have to, build a whole market. There's a market there, and maybe we can just build a better mousetrap. And also, I mean, come on, you knew me when I was young. I was arrogant as hell, and so there wasn't anybody going to tell me I couldn't go do something. You know what I mean? And so you just, I think you have to be. I've tried to learn humility a little more over the years, but I think for those of you who read the article, my old man would even say, like, "What are you wasting? Like, get a real job. Like, what are you doing?" And I think you can't. A lot of people won't tell you your baby's ugly. So take everything with a grain of salt, because sometimes there's a lot of ideas and there's a lot of not so good ideas. But this one was one we were passionate about, to your point. Jared was from Chicago. There's in Deerfield, there's a company out there, Baxter Healthcare. Actually, we had some connections into some folks that we started to build a network in the Chicagoland area and kind of give us some advice. And we just I think part of it though was we were just too young and stupid and didn't know any better. You know what I mean? So.
Well, you could say that about yourself. I might have thought that about yourself at the time, but I don't think I could say that. Now, and one of the things, again, they were outstanding at putting a business plan together. But there's one thing about doing market research, but prior to that, there was no lean business model. There was not the business model canvas. That we didn't talk about customer discovery. The old process was find a problem, write a plan, and you start selling the plan. So they did an outstanding job of really doing the market research and understanding the issue. But you still have to design something, right? You still have to, there's one thing to say there's a problem, but there's another thing to say, here's the solution that we're going to come up with. So let's talk a little bit about some of those early prototypes and some of the ideas that you all had. And if you don't mention, I am going to talk about the box that you guys came up with one time. So.
Sure.
I do remember some of those early iterations. Tell us a little bit about the process of going in actually developing the solution.
Well, we were very fortunate to have good connections and folks who helped us to get access to the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics PharmD program, and it was Dr. Abramowitz at the time. He was very supportive of our young, kind of earnest entrepreneurial pursuit, and gave us access to some of his PharmDs, and that was a really great information source for us. They were using the first moving product actually at the time, and so just getting even closer to your customer and to the problem and to the actual workflow of how they're using the product, I think was pretty important. So then, really almost hyper analyzing the problem and was step one. And from there, we started to have a lot of ideas. To your point, there for this, just to give you a sense, you have medical vials and syringes and IV bags and IV lines, and we were trying to make the process of moving highly potent intravenous medications from vial to syringe, from syringe to bag, from syringe to set, et cetera, and then syringe to patient, bag to patient. Like anytime you're moving drug from A to B to C to D, we wanted to make it so there's not only no drips, spills, or sticks, but so that there's no aerosolization or the unseen vapor leaks. And so you have to come up with a disposable widget that interfaces with these, the various bag sets, syringes. A lot of them have become standardized, which is helpful, from Luer lock syringes and et cetera. But and then to your point, we thought ultimately the long-term vision would be, let's not only make a better mousetrap from a widget, but let's introduce some disruptive innovation around, what if you could have, maybe instead of 4 pharmacy techs, each mixing chemo drugs in a hood, they call them laminar flow hoods or biological safety cabinets, you could have one tech man 4 hoods with a semi-automated chemotherapy compounding device that would eat our disposable and would not only address the issue of exposure to highly potent chemotherapy drugs, but would also mitigate dosing errors. They don't happen very often, and these pharmacists do double checks, even triple checks sometimes, but some things get through and patients die. And so we wanted to ultimately, our vision and mission was to make chemotherapy safer, not only for the workers, but also for the patients that inspired the genesis of the business. And from there, we started to win, so, okay, how did you, come up with your solution? We actually hired, won some business plan competition monies, raised some early $250,000 family friends investment, which we can talk more about, and we engaged with a third-party design development firm ultimately to help us kind of engineer, design, and ultimately transition to manufacturing a medical device. And they are super expensive. If to the extent you can, get a biomedical or mechanical engineer involved early to help you with some early prototyping and stereolithography, SLA kind of prototyping and that kind of thing, that can go a long way, and you can get some early prototyping, proof of concept, patent, provisional patent work done. We did do some of that too, but not having a bona fide co-founder with that sort of educational background, ultimately we had to take it outside and kind of with a true design shop.
And just sort of for the students to know, prototyping and 3D printing and all of this stuff has changed, is completely different today than it was 15 years ago. So doing prototyping back then was way more challenging and expensive, and we didn't have proto studios. We didn't have some of the resources the University of Iowa has today to be able to help. So it was a lot more challenging, especially in the state of Iowa when you're 21-ish at the time and you're trying to convince. The other thing, just to put into perspective, what happened in 2008? The economy went, so probably a pretty difficult time to start a medical device company when you're 21-ish, right? With no background, but these two, with John really driving this, let it happen. So let's talk a little bit about, since you mentioned the business plan competitions, talk a little bit about what that experience was like, and how you all, because you were very successful, right? You guys were very successful, winning some money. How'd you do it? What was it that when you went to these competitions, how did you tell the story? What was it that you think were the keys to success in winning those business plan competitions?
A few things. One, passion is contagious, and early stage fundraising is by and large about capturing hearts and minds. And I think, so you have to, every pitch you have to have the logo, so you have to have the rationale and the market and how big's the market and what's the competition, and you have to check all the boxes, but I think you really, when you can capture hearts and minds through, it's a little easier to do in a healthcare oriented medical technology startup with a real problem and pain point. That's how you set yourself apart, and you win. My sister always would tell me too, brevity's the soul of wit. And so this is why I wouldn't let Jared pitch, because Jared is so long-winded. He would just go on and on and on. And I was like, Jared, it's a like 8-minute pitch. You're on slide 2. What's going on here? So I think brevity's the soul of wit. You want to make your point and move on. And also when you get Q&A, I always tell Jared, I'm like, Jared, he asked you for the time. He didn't ask you how to build a watch. You know what I mean? So like, just tell him the time. Next question. Okay.
So, and last month we had the guys from Swine Tech, and I think one of the things from an entrepreneurial center perspective, these, Corvita was really our first big successes nationally to be able to go to competitions. And so literally we learned with them on what it takes to get University of Iowa students ready to go and to go out and be successful. And of course then, as you heard, some of you were here last month, you heard from the Swine Tech guys that it was the story, but everything else. Now, the one thing that I think back in when you guys were doing this is the plan was so critical. And in previous students that we had taken to competitions before John and Jared, the pitches were really good, but they didn't have the plan. The plan wasn't as strong. But these guys, their plan was this thick, and it was so detailed and so well written that back in the 2000, at those times, 8 and 10, the plan was probably as important as the pitch. Now it's probably changed a little bit. But you combine an incredibly well-written plan with the passion, the energy, what they were trying to do. And I think it helped that you had 2 guys from Iowa, right, from the University of Iowa. They're going up against people from MIT and Harvard and Stanford. And here these 2 kids from Iowa come in that are bold and brash and say, we're going to bring this device in. That gets people's attention. And so I think another lesson I wanted to make sure you all are getting from this is, we have an advantage of coming from Iowa with these cool ideas because people don't expect it, right? They didn't expect you 2 to show up with what you were doing. Mm-hmm. And when you can pitch it well and write a good business plan, and did you get to be in the pace car, or was that just him?
I was in the new business formation class. I got the B+, not viable, and
I wasn't your instructor though.
No, you weren't. No, it was Dan Cohen, who ended up going back out east, and we still keep in touch every now and then. But I'm like, I think he might have just knew me and tried to tell me I couldn't do it, so I go prove him wrong.
But one of the competitions you guys won, literally, was it the pitch competition around the Indy 500?
Yep.
Can you tell them a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, that was. I actually didn't go to that one, but Jared was there, and you had to do the elevator pitch in the amount of time that it took the race car to get around the track, and that was it. And they kind of cut you off whether you were done or not, and so it was very, it was a different take on the old elevator pitch.
Right. So that money kind of got you started, but then you had to start knocking on doors.
Yeah.
And again, awful time. And Iowa at that time was not really, there wasn't a lot of money around to a lot of investors. There were investors, but it was difficult to find. So let's share some stories about those early, when you're talking to angel investors and in groups and what that experience was like. And you can share the good, bad, and ugly on these.
Okay. Well, I think, when I call it the chicken and the egg phase. So it's like, how do you get money without the team? And, how do you get the team without money? And it's actually it's one of the most difficult things to cross the chasm, if you will. And so, it's the old adage, family, friends, and fools, the 3 Fs, as they say, for the early money. And so people want to know. For us as young entrepreneurs, there wasn't a big expectation that we would be, have skin in the game, and it would hurt if it didn't work out, because we just it was more circumstantial. But they did want to see, it was pretty important early on to get some investment from my father, dropped in some early monies, Jared's father, only 25 grand each, like, and he's kind of like, hey, this is what I was maybe thinking for like your wedding gift someday, good luck, whatever. You know, and you can spend it how you want, like I'm writing it off right now. And like, okay, thanks. But we got that, and then we got, you know, maybe some aunts and uncles. We were able to, you know, we worked the neighborhood of the hometowns and the family friends, and like really, you know, you can't get them to invest without saying, is your old man into this? He's going to do, you know, so we scrapped together $250,000 that way on top of like $150,000 in business plan competitions, bolted on maybe $100,000 from the state of Iowa and the demonstration fund through some direct financial assistance there. And that was sort of our first $500,000. But a big part of it was, you know, people weren't going to invest in just Jared and John. You know, I mean, at that stage with family and friends, yes, but they wanted to see more of a team. So you know, there are ways to get folks kind of involved and excited as advisors and kind of giving back. Maybe you have an advisory board, maybe you have a scientific advisory board, and a business advisory board. Maybe you know, the two co-founders add an experienced business person on the formal board of directors who's got some relationships and some networks, and you try to, it's a referrals game. Even more in the you know, COVID era, I think, without more in-person meetings like this there for a while, it's a networking and relationships game. So try to get folks involved and kind of leverage their networks, I think, was a big part of it for us. In addition to getting some early family money to get some skin in the game, and you know, so those are some of the things. You got to kiss a lot of frogs. I think we pitched at that stage hundreds to get like maybe a couple dozen to invest, and then ultimately we ended up raising a $2 million Series A. So you know, after the early monies, we were able to, you know, use that to get the design firm engaged, to get some proof of concept work, to get the patents filed, to do some early testing, to get some, you know, kind of user feedback on the prototype, some independent market research that we could point to go raise a $2 million Series A. And so I graduated May 2008. And fun facts about me: my son was born May 2008 with my college sweetheart. And so I was kind of working on this all the way up through that, and I then was so overzealous, and that people tell me all the time, you could have picked an easier business to start out with, and you could have picked a better time, dummy. You know what I mean? And I ended up, you know, it was just before the market meltdown, and so I got all these credit cards I applied for. I may or may not have. Claimed income, you know, that I, you know, I'm gonna be making that income. Anyways, credit cards were really easy to get at that time. I think I got $50,000 of credit card purchasing power. And I would travel to these competitions. I would travel to go meet investors. I would travel to, you know, go meet our manufacturing engineering firm in Madison. And then I would do the expense reimbursement, the monies I actually spent, and then I would just let the debt ride, and I would buy diapers, and I would buy, you know, food, and, you know, pay rent. And we did this for about a year and a half, and then right at the end of like 2009, we actually got some Iowa-based investors. Mark Drish says hi. I just had lunch with Drish.
Okay.
He was one of our Series A lead investors, and they took a risk. We had pitched them, one of the first people we pitched, and they're like, yeah. And they saw we kept making progress. A year and a half later, we put together a $2.25 million Series A. Jared took a victory lap because he didn't graduate till May of 2009, and so like we sort of got our company funded coming out of that, and we were just we were stoked to kind of be on salary for our own little company and be the self-proclaimed CFO, and he was the CTO, and we had Corvita was born.
You know, it's interesting. I'm on the board of that there was two funds up there, and I remember they would always look to me when we were talking about Corvita, and I'm like, well, they're like, what do you think about these guys? I said, well, John will be told no 1,000 times, and he'll continue to ask, right? I mean, he had that tenacity that it's going to take, because we all knew it was going to take a lot of money to move that forward. And it was interesting because, you know, in a lot of the funds at the time, and even today, it's people that look like me. right? It's older people that are in these funds, and you bring young people in certain areas, and the first perception is a lot of times is they're too young. Now, if we're talking crypto, we're talking some of the latest technology, you're expecting 20-somethings to be running the show. But when you're talking about medical devices, certainly back then, you were expecting people with a little bit more gray hair coming from, physicians or people in that industry. But there was something about the two of you that got people to get past. Yeah, they didn't have experience, but again, solid plan, the passion was there. They were sacrificing personally, financially to be able to do all this. So before we go into raising more about the Series A, so what were some of how did you have to deal, once you got the money from the early before the pre-Series A, what's the expectation of the communication and working with those really early stage funders, or was it more, here's some money, good luck, and you don't have to worry about it?
It was more hands-off. It was definitely more of the latter. Although we early on put together a quarterly newsletter that we would send out to folks, and to this day with all of my companies, I do a quarterly newsletter and financial reports, balance sheet, income statement, cash flow, that we send out within 30 to 45 days of each quarter. And I think you do it systematically, and you kind of have a template that you share in, and I think people really appreciate it, and it keeps them updated. But early on at that point, we just kind of, with only a dozen investors, we'd catch up on calls from time to time, but that was about it. But what we had to do with the money, what we know we needed to do, to your point, because we, ageism was real, for sure, and also we knew that we weren't going to be able to raise the money alone, so we used part of that early money to hire a fractional CEO, maybe paying them like $5,000 a month or something. When CEOs are making $300,000 market, you get someone with some equity and cash early on, and the idea is they'll put their name on the slide, they'll jump on the pitch calls with you, and it's not just two 20-year-olds or whatever. It's there's an adult in the room, I guess, as the perception was. And I think the idea would be they would come on full time post funding on the next round on a Series A. And we did that with both a COO who came out of Baxter, who knew, he was a PharmD also in a prior life, so he knew the problem, he knew the industry, and he kind of helped manage our engineering manufacturing firm, and then the CEO to help raise the money. So we tried to, sometimes you got to use that early money to buy some talent to get you to the next money. And for us in med device, it's years. We ended up raising ultimately $35 million all in over an A, B, and C, and $5 million of grants from National Cancer Institute. But it probably took us, we were a little less efficient than some other companies have done, but $15 million just to get to FDA clearance before you can even start generating revenue, which is one of the unique things about the life science industry. You got to raise millions of dollars before you can even get to sales dollar one.
And if I remember right, a lot of your time was spent on fundraising, right? That's kind of where you were the person. One of the more difficult parts of the job is going out there and trying to convince people to write checks.
Relentless perseverance, yeah, for sure.
So let's talk a little bit about getting the first customer. So you get something now. Let's talk, what was it like getting that first customer? How did you do it? And how did it make you guys feel when you actually had somebody that you now know you're kind of jumping forward now to getting a product in the market?
Well, we like to think we had the first few customers long before we got the FDA clearance. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have customers involved sort of in a kind of alpha and beta phase of the product development, giving iterative feedback, kind of really dialing in. And a lot of times engineers like to engineer in a vacuum, and they are smarter than the customer, and if they they show them the design and the customer picks it apart, sometimes the engineer will say, well, I just need to get smarter customers. So that doesn't really, that's definitely the wrong mentality. So I think we had a few what we call development partner customer sites, Desert Regional Medical Center, Dr. Tim Tyler, their group, and a couple of others early on. Marshfield Clinic, I think, was another one because they're up close to our engineering firm. They could get to them. University Biohospitals was one, right? And so once we got the FDA clearance, we were able to flip those to customers pretty quickly. And Tim Tyler, for example, was on our board, so he was even inside the tent. And while he disclosed he had equity and deferred the decision to his colleagues, we were able to. They all knew the product and loved it, and felt kind of like they were inventors or collaborators to bring it to life. So from there, we had to start to hire some reps and go out and kind of use them as references and hire and get some more customers.
So it's not easy when you're a founder of a company that you're going to have to bring other people in that are going to be higher than you on the official org chart. So can you talk a little bit about what it's like to be your founder, but now you're bringing in COOs and CEOs, and kind of how do you deal with that internally, number one, and what was that like, and how did your role in Corvita kind of evolve over time?
So the first CEO that we brought in was the fractional, and we got and raised a Series A. He sort of post funding was a little bit more rule with an iron fist type guy. We pretty almost immediately butted heads, and he found his way out of the organization in pretty short order. At that point, we found another gent, Kent Smith, an ex-Baxter healthcare exec, good old Southern boy, as he would say, and he really was like a second father to me. He was a great mentor, a true gentleman and a scholar, and really kind of he never really looked at it like, you report to me now, kid. Like, it was more, I'm gonna kind of mentor and bring, help to professionally develop these young men, and we worked together. And also, he was a great delegator. He's like, no, I'm going to tell you how I'm going to manage this. John, you get to do that. And like he would just be, he'd show me how to delegate too, which. So it's interesting. I think the good CEOs really try to work with their founders, not make the founders work for them. And ultimately, what I learned is the board is, it's not so much if you're CEO or not, it's how's the board composed, who's on the board, because the board runs the company. Ultimately, the board approves the budgets, the board hires and fires the CEO. So keeping control of the board is much more important than being the CEO, I would say.
And then you think, as you talk a little bit about the board, and again, from a little bit from an educational perspective, talk a little bit about how, the way it works is as you start bringing outside investors, your ownership starts to decline, right, as a percentage of 100, and then there's that tipping point where, to your point, where the board now has more control than the founder. So what was that like? Because there's I work with a lot of entrepreneurs over the years, and when you start talking to them about you're going to have to get investors, and that means you're going to have to give up a piece of their company, and it's like, it's mine. Why do I have to give up a piece of the company? It's like, because you're not going to get the money if you don't give them equity. So can you talk a little bit about that and mentally how you manage that? Because again, that's a real challenge to as your ownership starts declining, and all of a sudden, like you say, this thing that all the blood, sweat, and tears you put into it, now you've got this board sitting there, and they're really having a pretty powerful role, obviously, in where the direction of the company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we raised the Series A, and Jared and I still had just over half the ownership of the business, but we had a 7-person board, actually, 3 investors, the CEO plus the 2 co-founders, and then we had a mutually agreeable 7th, who was this Tim Tyler kind of customer individual. So for us, when we went and we raised then thereafter in the following couple of years a 10 million Series B, we were able to preserve the board structure with 3, 3, and 1, I think, which is a big win actually. But we obviously got diluted down to minority owners. And then when we went to raise a $15.5 million Series C, and the company was struggling a bit, we lost control of the board structure, and actually learned a lot about down rounds, that experience, and I think we ended up. Throughout this process, I think also Jared and I continued to fight a lot of ageism, to the extent that I wouldn't say over the A, B, and C my role changed or diminished. I actually we got bigger. We grew to about 20 to 25 employees. There was more and more to do. I actually got to hire a controller that I offloaded a lot of work and really got to focus on fundraising, grant writing, kind of investor relations, which is great. Less tactical, kind of more staff, but early on, back to end of 2009, credit card debt, just got the deal funded. We negotiated salaries and employment agreements, and it was pretty tough to feed the family of 3, as a young man. So I found myself, should I go wait tables? Should I, I need to make some other money. I actually was getting pulled into another device startup in Chicago called Advanced Cooling Therapy, and took on a part-time CFO role there, and found myself in the ensuing 8 years kind of as full-time operating CFO of both Attune Medical and Corvita Medical. and sort of really almost driven by necessity, learned this interesting model of fractional CFO work. I was actually full-time for both, but W-2 one, 1099 for the other. And I also got involved with Farapulse along the way, who's the company that I think you might have read about that had a successful acquisition. So, ultimately found my way out of Corvita in a sort of a turnaround situation, you might say, but continued to have success with both Farapulse and Attune. And sometimes investors would joke with me, John, you're like a little mini VC, you have your own portfolio of like companies you're working with. And one of the things you learn is, especially in device, there's a high failure rate, and so I knew early on to get involved with 2 or 3 might, diversify the opportunity to, have some success.
Yeah, I want to get to Farapulse. Let's talk briefly about the advanced cooling therapy. Talk a little bit about how you found that and kind of what your role was, and how did that, what were the similarities and differences between what you did there and for Corvita?
So there was a physician in Chicago who was an emergency physician, and he was a CAME in his prior life, and he actually invented a device to, I like to joke, to bring people back from the dead. He there was a lot of cardiac arrests, and he's an Eurodoc, and so it turns out if you lower body temperature, induce therapeutic hypothermia, and then gradually warm them, you double or triple chances of survival and neurologically intact survival. So he had this great idea and was like, he seen me around. I think he saw me win the $30,000 Innovate Illinois pitch, and he was trying to raise money and he was struggling, and he kind of pulled me in as his co-founder, and we had a board member too that kind of helped us. So we were a triumvirate there. I would say we were, it was a lot. It was a lot of fun, but I largely did the same things for both: financial accounting, reporting, fundraising, grant writing, investor relations, and we ended up raising about $30 million for Corvita, plus the $5 million grants, and $25 million for Attune. And both companies knew I was involved with the other, and there was sort of a gentleman's agreement. We wouldn't cherry pick investors from one and drop them to the other, or there was sort of a east wall there, and. But I was kind of operating CFO at both, with pretty similar roles.
So now you've got, in essence, 2 full-time jobs, and then you get connected to Dr. Stephen Mickelson and, in essence, Farapulse. So talk a little bit about that company and how you got engaged in that, and we're gonna. I've got about one or more. Well, after this, I got one more question. Then we're gonna open it up to you all. So get your questions ready. So give them a little background about the company, how you got involved, and kind of tell the story of. And it's a really good story.
Yeah, Dr. Michelson is a practicing electrophysiologist at University of Iowa hospitals and clinics. Electrophysiologist is it's like one step past a cardiologist. It's a heart rhythm expert, and so he was a fellow in the EB program, meaning he's through 4 years of med school, 4 years of residency, 2 years of cardiology, and he's in his 11th or 12th year, almost done, or with his journey to be a practicing EP doc. And he had this great idea for, his dad has AFib, and so he wanted to invent a new and safer way to treat atrial fibrillation, which is the world's most common heart arrhythmia. About 70 million people worldwide have an arrhythmia of sorts. And so actually, Dr. Howard Dietrich was an investor in Corvita and a long-standing friend of Kent's, our CEOs at Corvita, and he was getting more involved in the university. He was giving back, and he introduced me to Stephen. He's like, hey, why don't you go talk to this guy? He's got a device idea, And as it turned out, Stephen kind of pulled me in, and as his co-founder, we created a board. We put Dr. Dietrich on the board, so it was just us 3 board members. I worked with Stephen to negotiate the license agreement with Zetas Unleave at the time and University of Iowa Research Foundation. We actually, our office was Moonrakers here in town. We would, if you'd get out of clinic, and we'd just meet up at 6 and we'd start drinking wine and eating, and we would just kind of work on business plan stuff. And actually, Iowa Approach got into the Rice Business Plan competition. So I think both OmniLife, a health IT startup I was involved with, and then Iowa Approach went to the Rice Business Plan competition, and that was a lot of fun. And so I kind of find myself sort of as an unpaid co-founder of that one. I even invested a little bit at the time, and then we hired a ChemE student out of University of Iowa, Eric Sauter, as our first employee, and that company went on to really pioneer an arms race in the field of pulse field ablation for cardiac electrophysiology. We got Boston Scientific to invest at a very early stage in the animal phase after some early angel investments, and man, that company kind of took off like a rocket ship, and raising 80 million and was acquired for 450 million up front and a 300 million earnout. So it was amazing.
So as you look, now again, you're still a young guy, by the way. So as you look back over this, 15-year process, 12 to 15-year process, what are 2 or 3 of the big takeaways that you'd like to share with aspiring entrepreneurs out there?
Don't let people tell you can't, because damn right you can. And but also don't be one of those people who just that won't listen to feedback. If enough people are telling you your baby's ugly, maybe it is. So you be relentlessly perseverant, but also it all starts with a real pain point. So know that customer, and if there's a real pain point that the customers, more than just one, do your market research. The customers are really willing to pay to solve. Then never give up, never surrender. And as it relates to a business where you got to raise a lot of money, just prepare yourself on the front end. For every one investor we got, we probably had to pitch 80 to 100. I mean, we've ended up pitching just thousands and thousands and thousands of times. So be relentlessly perseverant. Put a good team together. You can't do it alone. I would always say, I think, hire people smarter than yourself and surround yourself with talent. Don't be afraid to kind of give up some control to get some talented folks involved, and spend your money wisely, because it's hard to raise.
Those are some great messages. So now I want to open it up to a few questions from the audience. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm David Saylor. I'm a global health student. First year at the university, I started my research when I was 16, so I'm in the medical device arena as well.
Cool.
I guess my first question would be, what are the 3 most important aspects of business building do you think are essential to the medical device arena?
A real problem, an innovative solution, and a competent and collaborative team. And we're in a big growing market.
Question? Yeah.
So I think you learn a lot off of your mistakes. What's the biggest mistake that you made, and how did you use that either in the future, or how did you reverse what you did?
Ooh.
Just one.
Okay. There's one called the Omaha incident I don't think we can talk about. But so let's see. I would probably say that I put Corvita took a pretty big toll on me. 10 years of blood, sweat, and equity, and but I also had a young family, and so I'm not sure if I could do it all over again, that it was the sacrifice was worth the price paid. But fortunately, I'm still, I have half time with my son, and we got a really good relationship. So I'd say work hard, but also play hard and make time for a family. I'm really happy with where I am in my life now, and with my relationship with my child, and friends with his mother. But that made for some tough, dark years for me, actually. So keep that in mind.
That work-life balance is always a big issue for entrepreneurs. And remember, they got started as college students, so they were both trying to finish college and do this startup. And if you think about it, investors don't want to invest in college students they want you full-time, 80 hours a week, focused on your business. They don't want to hear about, I've got a corporate finance test, or I've got an entrepreneurship paper due. So the pressure these guys were under in particular, and you also have to understand, once you start presenting and you start getting some traction, there's that expectation that where are we at today? That business is going to continue to progress. You can't put it off for spring break. You can't put it off for summer vacations. You have to keep the foot on the gas. And again, that was one thing I've always been impressed with both John and Jared, is they were able to keep the noise away while they're in college in particular, and to be able to balance both college. But I will tell you, when we run this program every year called the Okoji Entrepreneurial Institute, and both John and Jared both went, but in separate years. And after John's year, I'll never forget 2 or 3 of the local guys that are very successful entrepreneurs. They said, that guy's got to learn to lighten up. I mean, that guy is so intense. And I said, well, he's driven. I mean, literally, it's a great experience. I don't know if I saw him really smile during OEI. I think he was like, there would be somebody that we would say, you need to meet this person, and John's on him. I mean, he was, who is this guy? Start making connections and looking for investors. So you really, that was something I'll always remember about him, is this laser focus on what he was trying to do.
David would call me Mr. Intensity in a not so nice way. But it was funny. No, it was good. And we would make networking a game. Like if I was in a room, Jared and I would try to have a little competition who could get more business cards. You know what I mean? So I think that was work the room, and don't be afraid to ask for card contact info so you can continue to harass them after the event.
That was a great question. Other questions from the audience?
So, I want to know a little more about how you had the confidence as a 20-year-old to pitch not just to people that were likely, anywhere from 10, 20, 30 years older than you, but also, really successful. And what advice would you give to the students in the room that are possibly going to have those conversations in the future with their ideas when they're the youngest person in the room and they need that extra dose of confidence?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, honestly, taking advantage of the university resources, getting involved in the local pitch competitions, a lot of times these judges are investors themselves, so you're getting grilled by the very folks that ultimately could invest in your business or technology later, or folks of a similar profile. So I think it's great, practice, you learn by practice and trial and error. So I think those are really great forums. You can also ask, try to network in and get folks for coffee and kind of do one-on-one pitches. And each time you pitch, listen to feedback. Ask them at the end, hey, any feedback for me? Anything I could maybe do a little bit better or differently? Or after you do one of these pitches, you catch the judge after. So I would say that's practice for sure, but also just you've got to know your market and know your business. And the more you know your market and your customer, and I think that imbues confidence.
And if I could, and we'll come to you in a second. Something I remember watching when these guys were doing their pitches, it was that it wasn't arrogance, but it was at a line, but it was that confidence. And so much of when you're pitching to investors is they're looking at the idea, but they're really looking at the people. And I'm betting on these people. And John and Jared, even though they were young, you had this belief that they're going to go down fighting. They are not going to stop. They're going to put every ounce into this. And so I think, and certainly in the pitch and business plan competitions, that means so much, because these students will come in and you're like, that's an interesting idea. And I remember we'd ask people, so what are you going to do if you win the money? And these guys were like, here's what we're going to do, bang, bang, bang. And it was the intensity, it was the plan, it was the commitment to that they were going to see this through. And that, then you're like, how could we not, right? When you hear the story of his sister and you see the passion, you see the work, and you're like, I want to see these two be successful. That's how they want. And the other thing I will give it, they practiced all the time, and honestly, when you gave them feedback, they actually listened. I've been as an angel investor, I've been in rooms where we gave the person feedback and they started arguing with us, and then we showed them the door. And then they couldn't understand why they didn't get a check. And it's like, you won't listen. Because investors, like you said earlier, nobody will invest in somebody that won't listen, right? And be able to have conversations. So that's really important.
Yeah, be coachable.
Over here.
Yeah. You don't seem like the type of guy that's gonna quit, so what are you working on now?
Yeah, thanks. I'm. They had to pry me out of Corvita with a pretty robust severance. I'm doing 2 medical device companies. One's a women's health company called Surgical Innovation Associates. We just closed a $15 million Series B financing. We're in the market selling. We did about $3 million of revenue last year. We're gonna do shooting for 5.5 to 6 this year, and then 11 to 12 the year thereafter. I'm the CFO in that role. I was the 3rd employee, and it was actually kind of fun for me. This is the first company I was actually recruited to as a CFO. So the others, I was all kind of a founder and sort of that self-proclaimed CFO. I felt like it was kind of fun. They had already raised $2 million before me. We didn't have to fight the chicken and the egg phase, and it was kind of fun. So I've been there 4 years now. We now have 22 employees, and we're growing, adding another person a month. So that's a lot of fun. I'm doing another medical device company, actually, that I'm just, I stepped in as an interim CFO also because actually a friend in the MedTech Chicago community was the CFO co-founder, and he passed away suddenly from a strange situation, an aneurysm. And anyway, so that's an orthopedic device company that I'm also working on, and I'm presently being recruited to an atrial fibrillation software company in Marseille, France, which is kind of fun. Thanks.
When are you going to have time to do that? I'm sitting here, and you think, again, for for the students in particular, it's not a job though to you, is it? I mean,
it's
this
fun.
is what you live for.
Follow your passion. If you're not enjoying what you're doing, just find something else to do sooner than later, because otherwise, then you just get entrenched in that which you don't even enjoy, and it becomes even more harder, even more difficult to get into something you're passionate about. So, you invite me to come talk to students, MBA students, undergrad students, and I do that, at a lot of different places. And I always tell people, follow your passion, because if you don't love what you're doing, it doesn't work. But if you love what you're doing, it's rewarding, it's fun.
And you had another question? I'll go into the back next. Go ahead.
So you started your work at the University of Iowa using University of Iowa resources. Were you ever worried about IP rights?
No, we had David on our side.
That's fantastic. Never met you, David, but hi.
No, I mean,
I will fight for you. Trust me.
We weren't engineers, so we didn't have use of the engineering kind of resources or a lot of that, and we pretty early on went outside, pay for service, kind of work for hire, engineering design firm with all IP rights assigned. But I would say University of Iowa is not near, like the other universities are a lot more predatory. So I think it's kind of Iowa nice. It flows through the university for the most part here too. But you can also go to the Research Foundation and try to, I think early on we were worried about it, and we did get them to kind of give us a letter that made us feel better and was helpful.
So so the university has policies about all of this. If you are an undergraduate student at Iowa, and as long as you're not collaborating with a faculty member, for example, it is your IP and it will be your IP, and I will fight to the bitter end that it will be your IP, okay? Where it gets tricky is if you're a grad student or a faculty member, or if there is ownership claims to the IP with someone like that, you're still going to be listed on it, but that's where the potential is. And at Iowa, if the Iowa University owns the IP, you can form a company and license it, and that's what Steve did, is licensing his technology to start his company. So again, and the Papa John Center can help students with all of those, to navigate all of those things. We'll have one more question from the back.
Hi, I'm Jackie, I'm a general surgery resident, actually over at the hospital. My question for you is, in the earlier stages, so you have a good idea, maybe you have a prototype, you're starting to build your team. Where do you start? Like, who are kind of those core key people as you're progressing from those early stages into starting to raise funds, starting to look at professional financing like that? Who are those core members?
Yeah, great question. I would say one of them needs to be somebody who can help you raise money. Usually it's a fractional CEO or something along those lines, or maybe a board chairman might be a good place to start. Like actually, create a company, make a board. Also somebody's got to be moving the technology and the product forward. So whether that's usually a good hire. And then once you're really past the proof of concept kind of design freeze phase, our first full-time hire, usually after the founding team and device, is a quality engineer, RAQA, because you have to. That's just it's so important, and there's so much to do, and a lot of times companies think they can piggyback on some third-party firm, or what. That's generally a fallacy. So but that's sort of when the device is real and you're really you're marching it towards a 510K submission or a de novo submission or a PMA, and you need a quality person in-house, I would say.
So, John, I want to thank you. I learn more every time, and I sit there and I've had the privilege to know him for a long time and see the development. And again, I've seen the challenges that he's had to face, and just incredibly impressed with what you've been able to accomplish, and with your efforts and your ability to manage all of this process. And for those of you in the audience that are tied to the University of Iowa, we have the Papa John Entrepreneurial Center that I'm in charge of. If you're a faculty member in particular, we have UI Ventures, where John Darcy's in charge. So there are more resources on this campus than there's ever been, and there's more money in the state than there's ever been. You still have to, as you said, you got to identify a problem, you got to have a solution, you got to be able to demonstrate how you're creating value. But if you've got an idea, don't hesitate to come out and start talking to people about it, and we will help you. We'll get you connected, because really that's what this is all about, is the connections. And if you start, as John started listing some of those names, those companies they keep rotating through the same people, right? And I know that somebody's the CEO in this company, and then there's an exit, and then they join another company, and it's so that network of professionals. And I like to use a sports metaphor of being able to cross the goal line. Find somebody that's crossed the goal line, somebody that knows the industry, because if you don't know the industry and you don't have somebody that investors have confidence in, it's going to make it a little bit more challenging typically. So, John, thank you for being here. Continued great success. We'll have you back in a couple more years, and you can share some of the other the other exciting things that you're doing. But please help me thank John for coming tonight. So there might be a little bit of food left.